In the heart of Colombia, tucked away behind high walls and even higher security, sat a huge luxury villa that looked like something out of a billionaire's daydream. The man who owned it wasn't some movie star or tech giant. He was a feared international crime lord. This guy had it all: money, women, influence, and an army of bodyguards around him 24/7. His daily routine was full of indulgence, and every morning like clockwork, he'd go for a swim in his pristine private pool. One day, while doing his usual laps, the shiny, expensive watch on his wrist slipped off and sank to the bottom. He didn't hesitate for a second, dove right down after it. Just as his fingers were about to grab it, something unexpected happened. A hand, black-gloved, strong, grabbed him by the neck and yanked him deeper underwater. He thrashed around, bubbles rising to the surface, his eyes darting up, hoping one of his men would spot him. But no one came. The hand kept squeezing, and within moments he stopped moving. The man holding him under didn't leave right away. Instead, he maneuvered the lifeless body so it looked like the boss was still swimming, arms slowly moving, just enough to throw off anyone casually watching. Then, he slipped out of the pool, ducked into the basement, and peeled off the skin-tight swimwear. Underneath, he wasn't just any hitman. He was Arthur, the organization's top enforcer. This guy had a flawless track record. No mistakes, no mess. He didn't believe in gunshots or drama. His assassinations were like magic tricks, quick, quiet, and impossible to trace. Upstairs, chaos erupted when the staff found their boss's lifeless body. They all assumed it was just a tragic accident. Nobody guessed it had been a professional hit. With the confusion in full swing, Arthur slipped into a chef's uniform, strolled past the panicking guards like he belonged, and casually made his exit. Once outside, he bolted for his car, packed his tools, and took off. He had everything timed to perfection. As he drove toward the nearby bridge, he checked his new watch. Below, a ferry was passing by. He adjusted his speed, took a deep breath, then leapt off the bridge and grabbed onto the rear of the ferry. The current did most of the work, dragging him safely along without burning any of his energy. The job was done, and it hadn't even taken a full day. Back at his secluded waterfront hideout, Arthur handed his security guy a fancy bottle of wine as a thank you and hopped onto a speedboat. He cruised across the open water toward his hidden base, far away from cities, roads, and people. It was the perfect spot to stay off the grid. With the hit behind him, Arthur poured himself a drink, turned on some jazz, and let his nerves unwind. Then he moved to his computer, pulled up the file of his now-dead target, and erased every trace of it. He'd spent nearly a month studying that guy. He was a Mexican smuggler with a nasty reputation. The locals hated him. He'd once had his goons beat someone just for slowing down traffic. Arthur didn't care about revenge or justice. He just believed a good assassin did the job without leaving footprints. As he ate dinner and scrolled through the news, he came across a small blurb about the crime boss drowning in his pool. No mention of foul play. Perfect. That meant no heat on him. Happy with his work, he set up a meeting to get paid. The drop-off happened at a small, classic American diner. Arthur waited in a booth until a silver-haired old guy rolled in. Harry, an old-timer in a wheelchair. But don't let the chair fool you. Harry still had grit. He'd been Arthur's go-to middleman for years, handling payments and logistics. They had a lot of history, and Arthur trusted him more than anyone. After handing over the money, which was a cool $1 to $2 million per job, Harry looked uneasy. He didn't waste time and asked Arthur for a favor: train his son, Steve. Apparently, Steve was a screw-up, constantly broke, drowning in debt, and generally useless. Harry was at his wit's end and thought maybe some discipline from Arthur might straighten him out. Arthur wasn't thrilled at the idea, but he couldn't say no to Harry. They went way back. Later that night, Arthur celebrated a bit. He hit a bar, had a few drinks, and left with a stylish girl on his arm. After a fun night, he dropped a stack of cash for her and slipped away quietly. Back home, he opened his laptop, ready for the next assignment. But when he read the target's name, his heart sank. It was Harry, his own friend, his mentor. He thought it was a mistake, so he called to double-check. But the person on the other end confirmed it. Harry was the next target. No mistake. Arthur didn't take the news lightly. He requested an in-person meeting with a higher-up in the organization. They agreed and flew him out in a private jet to a location so secret it didn't even have a name. Upon arrival, he was met by a bodyguard, one who just so happened to be an ex-world champion boxer. That alone told Arthur how serious this meeting was. Inside the car, the boss, Dean, was on the phone with his son. Even guys who order hits for a living still care about family, it seemed. Once off the call, Dean got down to business. 6 months earlier, they'd sent 5 agents to South Africa to take out a cartel leader. None of them made it back. No updates. No bodies. Just silence. And the only people who knew about the operation were the director and, yep, Harry. Things got weirder when they looked into Harry's finances. $20 million had suddenly shown up in his account. For a guy barely getting by, that was suspicious as hell. Dean believed Harry had betrayed them. Maybe he tipped off the target in exchange for a payday. The organization didn't like loose ends. They told Arthur flat out, "Kill Harry, or we'll come after you next." Arthur had just 48 hours to make choice. Conflicted, Arthur went through the motions of preparing for the job, but inside, he was a mess. Then something unexpected happened. He called Harry and told him everything. Told him to pack up, grab a gun, and run. Harry followed Arthur's instructions to the letter. He avoided the main hallways, short-circuited the building's power, and escaped through a hidden passage that led to a nearby parking lot. There, Arthur was waiting. Harry knew it was the end. He saw Arthur's expression and realized the setup. The old man didn't argue. Instead, he confessed. He had betrayed the organization. He had taken the money, and yeah, he knew this day would come. But he was grateful Arthur gave him the chance to make peace with it. To help sell the story, Harry handed over a gun and even fired off a few rounds to make it look like he died in a robbery gone wrong. Then, he nodded, and Arthur did what had to be done. He pulled the trigger. Days later, Arthur stood at Harry's grave, head bowed. That's where Steve showed up. The kid looked different, less cocky, more serious. They got into Arthur's car and headed to Harry's old house. On the way, Steve opened up, saying he never felt loved by his father. If he cared, Steve muttered, why didn't he ever reach out? Arthur told him the truth. Harry did care. He talked about Steve all the time, shared stories from when he was just a kid. But sometimes pride gets in the way of showing love. At the house, Arthur offered Steve money to help him get back on his feet. But Steve refused. He was done being weak. He said he'd sell his car, buy some gear, and hunt down the people responsible for his dad's death. Arthur didn't argue. He just nodded. Even though Steve looked like a broke wanderer with no real direction in life, he was still reeling from his father's death. He wasn't just sad, he was furious. The image of his old man getting gunned down while stuck in a wheelchair kept playing in his mind like a broken record. He couldn't understand who would do something so low and cold-blooded, swearing revenge under his breath. He promised himself he'd find whoever did it and make them pay. But Arthur, his late father's friend and a seasoned killer, told him to cool down. Charging in with fire in your veins only gets you dead, he said before leaving Steve to stew in his anger. A little later, as Steve sat in his car, waiting to meet someone, a young black guy walked up out of nowhere. At first, it seemed like he just wanted to talk, but suddenly the guy pulled out a pistol and demanded Steve hand over the car. Wrong move. Steve, still simmering from everything, lashed out. He grabbed the guy's arm, slammed him against the door, and let out his rage with a few brutal punches and a couple of kicks to the gun's face. He was seconds from putting a bullet in him when Arthur showed up out of nowhere and stopped him. Arthur yanked Steve into the car and gave the would-be thief a cold warning. Forget tonight ever happened, or next time, you won't be walking away. The guy, clearly shaken, didn't argue. As for Steve, he was still shaken up but drove away without a word. The next day, Steve found Arthur on the street and told him flat out he wanted in. He wanted to become an assassin like him. Arthur didn't take him seriously and brushed it off, but Steve wasn't giving up. He reminded Arthur how much his father had done for him over the years, and now that he needed help, Arthur was just walking away. It struck a chord. Arthur didn't say anything in that moment, but as he glanced at an old photo of his fallen friend later that night, guilt crept in. He reached out to Steve and agreed to give him a shot under strict terms. At 7 a.m. sharp, Steve showed up at a quirky little pet shop where Arthur was waiting. Arthur explained what being a mechanic really meant. No, not someone fixing cars. It was their code word for someone who fixed problems for cash, usually through very permanent means. Steve acted like he knew the ropes, talking big like he'd been in the game for years. Arthur rolled his eyes. You don't know a damn thing, he snapped. Steve got defensive and threw it back at him, saying Arthur didn't know anything about him either. Arthur just smirked and rattled off everything. Where he was born, what age his mom passed, his old juvenile record. He even knew the color of his first backpack. Steve was stunned. That moment broke down his ego, and from then on he was all ears. Arthur's first lesson was simple. Learn to act. Blend in. Appear harmless. To do that, He made Steve adopt a dog, not just for companionship, but to build the image of a normal, soft-hearted guy. Every morning, Steve would walk the dog around the block, sit at a cafe with a Sudoku puzzle, and make small talk with strangers. Nobody suspected a thing. He looked like your average nice guy. Only after Steve got the hang of pretending to be normal did Arthur start training him in weapons. At first, Steve's aim was all over the place. He could barely hit a tree, but with time and constant practice, his aim tightened. Soon, he could split a concrete block in half with a single shot. Arthur didn't just train him to pull a trigger. He taught him the art of deception. Steve studied medicine, learned how to manipulate crime scenes, and even picked up how to make a death look like an accident. After all, if the insurance company ruled it as an accident, it meant no investigation, and they could move on to the next job smoothly. When the bank took Harry's house and car, Steve started living with Arthur. The guy's skills grew fast. Once Arthur thought he was ready, he took him along on a real mission. They drove to a worn-down apartment building where a sketchy arms dealer lived. Arthur acted like a customer looking to buy weapons and insisted he wanted them delivered in 24 hours. The dealer agreed and asked for money up front. While he was counting the bills, Arthur slipped a rope around his neck and ended him in seconds, quick and clean. Next came the setup. Arthur switched on some adult video footage, tossed a pillow in a certain position, and staged the whole thing to look like the guy had died from an overly enthusiastic solo session. Steve looked puzzled, but kept quiet. Arthur then pulled him into a room filled with files and photos showing the arms dealer's crimes, drug trafficking, shooting cops, and more. The guy had it coming. Then came Steve's test, his first solo target. It was a burly man who came to the same cafe every morning. But this guy wasn't just some random regular. He was a rival assassin from another crew, nearly untouchable. But Arthur had found two of his weaknesses: tiny dogs and young men. Weird combo, but useful. Arthur coached Steve thoroughly, even down to the guy's favorite pickup lines and phrases. Sure enough, the man took the bait. He invited Steve for drinks, and Steve agreed. Arthur handed him a bottle with a clear liquid, just 6 drops in a drink, and the man would drop dead from heart failure. At the bar, Steve was smooth. He made the guy laugh, charmed him effortlessly. When the guy wasn't looking, Steve slipped the drops in his glass, but then hesitated. He didn't want an easy out. He wanted the rush, the kill, with his own hands. So Steve bailed early. The guy followed, thinking he was going to get lucky. Back at the apartment, the man started making moves, literally unbuttoning Steve's shirt. Steve played along just long enough to grab the guy's belt and use it as a weapon. Big mistake. The man was huge. He spun around, grabbed Steve like a rag doll, and slammed him into the floor. Steve reached for a chair and cracked it over his head. Nothing. He got picked up and smashed into a wall. Dragged into the kitchen, he got tossed around until he saw a screwdriver on the counter. He grabbed it and jammed it into the guy's gut. Even then, the man kept coming. Steve didn't stop stabbing until the guy finally dropped, a bloody mess on the floor. When Steve got back to Arthur's place, he looked like he had been hit by a train. Arthur was pissed. "I told you not to get physical with him." "This wasn't part of the plan," he growled. But deep down, he knew Steve needed a mess up to learn. As a weird kind of celebration, they hit up a local bar. Arthur ran into a girl he'd met before and left with her. Steve wasn't far behind. He found someone too. After a night of fun, Arthur went to the airport to pick up a delivery. Inside the package was a cash payment for his last successful job. Then Dean called. Dean wasn't happy. He said Arthur went off script by letting someone else handle a mission. Arthur snapped back, reminding him he had a deal with Harry, not the entire organization. When Dean found out Steve was Harry's son, he got heated. He warned Arthur not to trust him blindly. "You might be raising a snake that bites the hand that feeds it," he said. Still, Dean had another job lined up. It was big. A high-paying client wanted someone gone fast. Arthur reviewed the file at home. The target's name was Andrew, 45, a self-proclaimed prophet who ran a cult and made millions for brainwashed followers. Arthur and Steve headed to Chicago, where Andrew's operation was based. From a distance, the guy looked like a scam artist dressed in holy robes. He had already been connected to the murder of a nun who claimed to be carrying his child. The nun disappeared, and her body turned up 2 weeks later. Andrew had paid over $22 million to hush it all up. One day, as the two watched him in action, Andrew walked into a hall full of followers. As soon as he saw people, he snapped into preacher mode, hands raised, head high, speaking like he was the second coming. People clung to his every word, especially a young woman clearly enamored with him. They followed him back to his penthouse and installed tiny surveillance cameras by sneaking through the building's plumbing system. Arthur drilled a small hole and placed a camera just inside the wall, keeping an eye on the target's movements. They waited patiently. Andrew had a private appointment that night with someone named Frank. Andrew's so-called personal doctor was a guy named Frank, and his main job was to keep the cult leader breathing and looking healthy. Through the mini-spy camera hidden in the wall, Steve noticed something strange. Frank had injected Andrew with a dose of ketamine. Now, most people would think it's just a heavy sedative, but Arthur had warned Steve about this stuff. Ketamine might knock someone out, but if adrenaline kicks in, it can reverse the effects or cause unexpected reactions. That messed with their whole plan, and it was a complication they weren't ready for. Steve thought maybe Arthur was telling him to call it off, but instead, Arthur just reminded him to wear gloves. No fingerprints. No loose ends. The two slipped out from their hiding spot and quietly stepped into the room where Andrew, high as a kite, was slouched on the couch. The doctor had just walked out to answer a call, so the timing was perfect. Andrew was completely out of it. Eyes glazed over, body limp. He couldn't put up any fight if he wanted to. Arthur crouched down behind Andrew and held his head firmly. Steve moved in, slid a flexible endoscope into the cult leader's mouth, and blocked his airway. Within seconds, Andrew's eyes rolled back. He gasped, twitched, and stopped moving. By the time Frank walked back in, it was already too late. He froze in the doorway, completely losing it when he saw his miracle man lying there, lifeless. If word got out that their messiah had kicked the bucket, the cult's empire would fall apart, and with it, billions of dollars. But just when it seemed like things were smooth, Steve accidentally knocked a tiny screw loose from the inside of the wall. It clinked to the floor with a sound way too loud for comfort. Frank immediately ordered one of his goons to check it out. As the guy leaned in toward the wall, Steve popped out and shot him point blank. Gunfire echoed through the place. One group of guards ran straight toward them. Another set bolted downstairs to seal off all the exits. Arthur snatched a weapon from a fallen guard, smashed another guy into the wall, and broke through a window leading to the rooftop. They sprinted across the roof with bullets whizzing past them. Steve wasn't having an easy time either. He was struggling against 3 bodyguards and doing everything he could just to survive. At one point, while trying to yank a gun out of someone's hands, Steve caught a solid kick to the chest that nearly threw him over the edge. Somehow, he regained balance, twisted the fight around, and flung the attacker off the rooftop instead. Eventually, Steve caught up with Arthur. They strapped themselves into climbing harnesses and rappelled down the side of the building. But luck wasn't on their side. The ropes came up short, and they were left dangling midair. A guard above them opened fire. Desperate, they swung toward a nearby window and managed to crash into a random apartment. They quickly changed clothes, disguised themselves as tourists, and exited the building in a crowd of panicked guests. Once clear, Arthur told Steve to use fake names and split up. They had to go their separate ways to avoid getting caught at the airport. While Arthur waited for Steve's arrival, he noticed someone sitting nearby, Sebastian. It was a face he never expected to see again. Sebastian was supposed to be dead, one of the 5 agents who vanished in South Africa, allegedly killed after Harry betrayed them. At least, that's what Dean had said. Arthur followed him quietly onto a bus. He didn't waste time with polite greetings. "I saw a bullet hole in your head last time. Care to explain why you're still breathing?" Arthur asked coldly. Sebastian shrugged, as if it was no big deal. "Dean paid me to fake my death," he said. "He wanted the others dead, and he wanted Harry framed. I just did the job." The truth hit Arthur like a truck. Dean had orchestrated the whole thing. He was the real traitor, not Harry. Arthur had been manipulated into killing his closest friend. "You've been played hard," Sebastian smirked. "And you swallowed a whole." Arthur didn't respond. Instead, he lunged. The two of them were trained killers. It wasn't a fight. It was a war in miniature. They slammed into seats, cracked windows, exchanged brutal punches. Sebastian wrapped an arm around Arthur's neck in a chokehold. But Arthur grabbed the pin from a nearby fire extinguisher and jammed it into his attacker's eye. He didn't bother finishing him off. Instead, he tossed him out of the moving bus and watched as a speeding car mowed him down. Next up, Dean. Before Arthur could make a move, he got a call from Steve. He had been captured by a hit squad from the same organization. Arthur whispered a code. "Check under the sofa." Click. Steve reached down, found a hidden gun, and unleashed chaos. 3 men went down. He escaped, and not long after, he and Arthur reunited. They grabbed their emergency gear. While packing, Steve spotted Harry's silver pistol in Arthur's box. He didn't say anything, but the look in his eyes changed. Now he knew. On the way out, Steve asked a strange question. You ever think about the people you've killed? Arthur paused, caught off guard, but he answered honestly, not when I'm doing it. After? Yeah, sometimes. Ever killed someone you knew? Steve continued. Yes. You feel anything? Arthur's eyes got glassy. Not in the moment. But later, yeah. Steve shrugged. Doesn't matter. A job's a job. Arthur stayed quiet. No answer. They visited Finch, one of Dean's lieutenants. Steve shot him in the leg as a warning. When that didn't work, Arthur grabbed Finch's daughter and held her near an industrial meat grinder. He didn't even flinch. Finch stayed silent. Arthur gave him one last warning. Talk, or I turn this lever. Blood splattered. Finch broke. Turns out, he was bluffing. The flesh was just a piece of beef. But it did the job. Finch spilled everything. Arthur called Dean next. How much was Harry worth to you? He asked. 50 million, Dean replied. Tell you what, I'll give you 10 to let it go. Not interested. You're a target now, Dean warned. Every gun in the business will be pointed at you. Arthur didn't care. He staged a decoy, faked a presence inside a nearby building, just to lure Dean out. Then he and Steve geared up. Full tactical mode. Arthur hijacked a car and tracked Dean using traffic cams. At the same time, Steve took over a city bus and waited near the expected route. When Dean's convoy showed up, Steve floored it, rammed straight into the last vehicle. Everything exploded into chaos. Arthur gunned down guards and jumped onto a garbage truck, riding it like a tank as he plowed after Dean. Steve met them in a narrow alley, boxed them in, and the lead car crashed. Dean's driver tried to reverse and flee, but Arthur slammed the garbage truck into their car. The whole vehicle crumpled like a tin can. Everyone inside died, except Dean, who crawled out, barely alive. They stood over him, didn't say a word, and emptied their clips. It was over. Arthur's plan from there? Disappear. Fake names, new lives. You coming with me? He asked Steve. Steve didn't answer, but as he reached for a water bottle, he revealed Harry's silver gun. Arthur saw it. He understood. They made a pit stop at a gas station. Steve filled up the tank, went inside to buy snacks, and said a casual, sorry for everything. Arthur nodded. Don't worry about it. Steve smiled, walked back toward the pump, then yanked the nozzle out, letting gas spill freely. He walked away slowly. Behind a wall, Steve pulled the gun and fired. Boom! Arthur's car turned into a fireball. Later, Steve wandered back to Arthur's house, not sure what to do. He turned on a music player that Arthur loved, then walked into the garage, got into a car, and drove off. Halfway down the road, Steve noticed a note on the passenger seat. It said, if you're reading this, I'm probably toast. Steve chuckled just before the car exploded. Back at the house, the music stopped. A hidden wire triggered the detonator. The entire building went up in flames. Later, when investigators looked at gas station footage, they were stunned to see Arthur quietly slipping out of the car seconds before it blew up. He had survived. Again. And he still had unfinished business with anyone foolish enough to come after him.